Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at the new Dual Delay X delay unit from UVI. Anyone who follows me knows that delay is my single greatest, effect love out there. And I think that delays are one of those things that you shouldn't just buy one and use it every now and then, that you should buy it, fall in love with it. It should be your forever mistress, and it should be used all the time. So I'm looking at this as like, okay, would I want to replace my current go-tos with this new toy with the pretty colors? And I will be honest and say I'm not sure. There is as such nothing wrong with it, but it possibly doesn't appeal to me because there's nothing wrong with it. Is it perhaps too perfect? Now, it's one of those things that's probably going to work really well for some people, and if I had it, I could use it from time to time, nothing against it. But the question is, seeing most doors already come with a at least competent delay, does this add enough to justify going out and getting it? Also, does it offer enough to overcome what I think is a pretty close competitor, or maybe two close competitors, but one very close on price? So let's have a dig into it. It is an interesting unit. Here it is. Using a real sort of mid-80s Keith Emerson style brass. So it's a sound that has a certain amount of complexity into it, not in that wacka kind of thing. You can try it on that if you like, but a good synth brass has a fair amount of complexity. So the question is, how is my Echo going to bring that through and enhance that to make it more majestic? Let's look at bypassing. So that's our raw sound. There is no processing happening here at all. That's actually off. So not a bad sound. When we add in delay, we want it to expand and be grand and carry its range from soft through to commanding. In many ways, it is carrying what's there through very, very well. That's both a strength and a weakness, as we will look through. It's capable of sounding nice, and it's capable of being a bit varied. All of that is really good. We'll take a quick walkthrough of UVI, and then we will do the good and bad and get into looking at the device in some detail. UVI are a developer now of some note. They've been around for some time. They started out, as far as I can understand, a long time ago in soundware. So samples of things. They've got their vintage Vault thing, which lots of little VST devices that will claim to duplicate certain instruments of yore. So in certain ways, a bit of a direct competition for Roland Cloud. They do have certain effect devices, but probably their powerhouse is Falcon. Falcon's one I would be very, very interested to dig into, but there's no way to try it out. So if you're watching this UVI, yeah, let me have a go. At $350, Falcon's not the cheapest synth, but it's up there with Omnisphere and the like in terms of its capability. Its capability in theory is like owning the whole of Reason, except Falcon obviously doesn't have the sequencer, DAW, that stuff attached to it. Potential there is huge, and they seem to be extracting some of the things that they've worked out and turning them into standalone effects units. Good on them, fair enough. The dual delay, Its pricing is set to be 59, that's US dollars, which is okay. At the moment, till the end of July, assuming you get to watch this before the end of the July, you may well not get to 29. At 29, yeah, it's a very, very attractive proposal as a what we might refer to as a loss leader to get us playing and on the UVI train. At 59, it's probably fair enough, but it also means that we have to sort of be aware of what else is in the market. They say it's going to be my new go-to delay. Saying that to many people may be like, oh yeah, fair enough, cool. Saying that to me is red rag to a bull, because that's asking me to leave Kylie Minogue for Lady Gaga. It's a big ask, so I'm answering this, or trying to answer this, looking at this as, is this the one delay that could rule most of what I do? So we will move into our good and bad. Well, they've set a big challenge in the sense of, is this likely to be my one delay that would displace the other that I've got? And I've got several delays. I've got a few mistresses. Sorry, Kylie. What's good is it has a very clean sound. And so it does tend to translate whatever has come into it at the other end quite well. Not all delays do that. And that can be a strength, that can be a weakness. Its rotation thing, which we will have a look at, is interesting. Question is it interesting enough to justify adding another mistress to the harem, so to speak? It is pretty versatile in a sense. It has the ability to turn into a sort of DIY reverb relatively easily. It's not the only player in that market, though, so the question is, does it do it well enough compared to its competitors? It does it perhaps better than most, but having a couple of devices already that do this, and knowing that there's one out there that just blows your socks off, then we have to say, is it versatile enough? The things that I am unclear or unsure about is that it's got a very clean sound. Even with the saturation and what have you, I'm not convinced that it ever brings a lot of character. If you're looking for a digital delay line to be sort of really almost perfect carbon copy at the other end, yes. If you're looking to be able to make a few very polite changes so that you've got a complete control of what's coming out the other end, yes, great. If, however, you are looking for the brutal magic of character delay, then this might not grab you. Its strength is its weakness. Its strength of being incredibly clean and incredibly high quality, yeah, excellent, but it's its weakness as well. The other weakness is, because they've priced at 59, Valhalla. Valhalla have a diffusion reverb ability, which is, they must have sold quite a lot to the devil to do that, because it's unusual and it's greater than what is here. So at about the same price, we'd be saying, how does this compete with Valhalla? Now, all fairness, I don't own Valhalla. In many ways, I think there's a lot that's really impressive. You can go back and watch the review. I'll stick the picture up there to help you find it. And I think, oh my God, that's just stunning. But is this going to be enough to overcome the 7 trillion options that are inside your average Valhalla unit? Don't know. That's where you're going to have to work it out. There are some definite strengths to this in its translation of clean, high quality at the other end. We will compare with a couple of other delays that you'll hear don't translate as accurately as this. But we'll also have to work out, and this is what I think you're going to have to do, because our wives and our mistresses are a personal choice, is to work out, is it for you, is it really going to be that you would drop 1, 2, 3, 4 of your other delays to make this your centerpiece. Oh, before we go much further, we're going to attack that relatively head on by looking at, well, we've got this sand and we're going to affect it with 3 different devices. The first one is going to be the echo. Now the echo is a really nice delay unit, but I'm putting it in here as the role of default. We can look at onboard. I must say I rarely use them. They're okay. Better than nothing, but pretty flat. Whereas the echo is a good go-to unit. With, on the surface, a rather similar feature set and clearly based around the classic space tape thingy. So that's one contender. The next contender is this fine fella. This is very much a Benedict kind of delay because I made this. So dry. Ooh, some interesting chords there. In, little switch. Now you'll hear the sound becomes very thick. Great, because the sound becomes really thick. The trade-off here is that we do lose some detail. There's a fair amount of detail in this sound, and if we now compare it to the Dual Delay X, so Dual Delay, Hertz delay. So the Hertz delay becomes thicker, richer, but at the trade-off that we lose some of the detail of the sound. Hear how that's really quite transparent. We haven't added much to the sound, we've just picked it up and carried it forward, even though we're doing all this other stuff. And then comparing it to the echo, which in comparison is a little flat. But to be very fair to the echo, Hertz delay is doing more, a lot more. And Dual Delay X is doing some similar things to Hertz delay in different possible ways. And it does what it's meant to do really well. The question then just comes down to, in your mix, would you be looking for this perfect translation, bearing in mind the modifications that you've made, or would you be looking for a character unit? That's going to be entirely up to you. I like character units. And of course I've got things like the echo, which are perfect. I can see why this is attractive. You have to decide whether it's what you'd be looking for. So, let's look at its features. We'll move off this sound, and we've got a pretty simple setup here of primarily snare with a little bit of kick just to help us stay oriented. Here is the delay. We have some presets. And anyone who follows me knows kind of what I think of presets. So So see here, we're capable of getting some very, this is perfect digital delay, doing tape echo, space delay, all those sorts of things. They're all in there. There's tons and tons of stuff. Cool, fair enough, default. We've got our overall mix up here. Little odd. It seems like a bit of an afterthought to put your mix up here. So fully dry, fully wet. In and out levels don't seem to match. And I must sort of wonder why. Especially seeing the delay seems to be relatively loud relatively quickly. So for something that seems to be trying to be perfect in every way, I did wonder at that. It's not necessarily wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I just kind of wondered at that. Because this is one of those ones that you might well use this as a send device. I effectively never use my delays, my echoes, as send devices. They're always per instrument. That's how I'm building my depth in my track, my front to back. But because this is able to be a reverb of some sense, then the 100% is really vital. But there's probably a reason, fair enough. We're then presented with these displays, which make the product look all kinds of amazeballs, but they don't seem to serve a purpose, other than to look very techy and like, ooh, you know, this mixing thing's all about technology and knowing technology stuff. No, it's not. Yes, the technology's necessary. You can't skateboard without a skateboard. Otherwise it's called a faceplant, which is a whole other ball game. They give you a little bit of a visual of what's going on, but sort of why would you need it? I feel like they're a little bit of frippery. Again, other people will feel otherwise, but that's kind of my thought. So we've got this delay. We can set our time from 1 millisecond. Be nice to go shorter, but fair enough. Very few go shorter than a millisecond. It handles that sort of flangey stuff quite nicely. Handles movement quite nicely as well. So we can see our taps. We can offset. So we see our left and right offset from each other. So this doesn't, like most knobs in this sort of situation, the offset often makes, whichever way you lean, longer. This actually divides, makes it shorter. There's no actual right or wrong there. It's just, it took me a little bit to understand, hang on, even though it shows me what it's doing, it's actually making that shorter. I expect it to go longer because normally everything goes longer. But maybe they've decided, oh, well, we'll say you can offset those two against each other. Fair enough. It's not the way I'd normally do it, but it's not fair to say that it's wrong. It's just the opposite of what I would have expected. With feedback, we can do the same. So we can set one side to, and again, this is sort of subtractive. We're reducing the amount. You know, we can halve the amount of. To get something to a center, you actually have to type in a number, which occasionally doesn't actually seem to take us back. Maybe some knobs do, some knobs don't quite get it, but you get used to it. So it allows you to have a certain kind of control, which is interesting on your left-rights. It can be very, very useful to, rather than hard panning a sound like a thoughtless person, to pan it a little way out and then move it delays further out. That will give you a nicer feeling. Or if you're pulling it out but and that works for the mix, but then you feel like the sound is getting lost out there, as in it's no longer connected to the center, you can look at pulling your echoes back in. So all nice, different approach, but all good. We can then add modulation. It doesn't go very far. I sort of think, well, okay, it's nice to have fine control here, but how can I do stupid? What if I want to do stupid modulation? So if I were the guy in the designing seat, I would have said, look, that's cool. Now can you give me one where I can move it an octave or something or other? Not that I chase particular numbers here, but that's cool for fine control. Now give me a stupid button. So I can press this button and it goes to 10 times whatever it is or whatever, just so I can do wild effects. How often am I going to use it? Not often, but it seems to me kind of nuts that the thought's there and then they've gone, oh, let's be safe, let's be sedate. I don't want to be safe or sedate when I'm using modulation. I want to be able to be as wild as I can. Something that's nice, you can set your rates, obviously. Again, just reasonably limited rates, but you can set your rates. Automatically, your LFO does the usual thing of offset. So one side one way, one side the other way. You'll hear that it creates a movement. Most people are like, yeah, that's great. Sometimes it's terrible. In which case we can narrow that down here or move it out a little bit so it's a more realistic sense of stereo than that weird kind of thing. Now let's go real short on our time. I will admit I didn't try this before, but bearing in mind I'm only in Cairns, it's not a terrible flanger. But we probably need more modulation depth than this. Next we've got this, and this is they see this as their ace in the hole, and it's interesting. Whether it's good, I don't know. We've got a knob that can rotate or reflect. Two different ways to achieve similar results. So if we put rotation, we see that each tap, each echo, now has been moved like this in time. So if we go, let's try to go sort of pretty short and have lots of feedback. Actually, it's the same. You can hear it spinning. And it is interesting for doing those kinds of things. There are times in a mix where I want to do that kind of dub delay sort of thing. This would be a very precise way of doing it, which has some strengths in that often when you're doing the dub delay kind of thing, it's very easy for it to not be exactly what you want it to be. But I also like to go with what the device is doing too. So it's a swings and roundabouts, but it's kind of cool that you can have this thing moving. The phase thing that it's showing you, I just don't see the sense in. But we can move right out to 180, which means that they just swap every time. If you're looking to create a little bit more space and stereo, especially with regards to the reverb capabilities we get into, then that might be a kind of a cool thing. Reflection. That's a kind of ping pong. Exactly how to do the perfect ping pong, I don't think I worked out, but I rarely do. Perfect ping pongs. Anyway, but it's interesting. Is it dramatic enough? I don't know. But some people will just love it. We'll just pull that out. We've then got some control of our master mix, and it's kind of weird. Our master mix is up here and it's here, and it's not there on the end where we'd normally expect it to be. So workflow seems to have been designed by a graphic designer rather than an engineer. I don't know. Again, it's okay, you get used to it, but rather than that sort of let's start on this end of the 19-inch rack mount and work to that end of the 19-inch rack mount, and we've got our process. This sort of dots about a little bit. Speaking of dotting about a little bit, if you click up in the top here, then you get a graphic of the flowchart. Good. I was excited when I first clicked it because I thought, ooh, it's going to let me move these modules around. I'm sorry, it's not. But it's a graphic of what goes where in the signal process. And as you see, the way they're laid out and the way they actually work in the device are not the same. I, as much as possible when designing a device and its front panel, try to keep the actual workflow and what is happening in the guts to be as close as possible. You see here we've got diffusion in the middle of the process, whereas here it's on the end of the process. So you might need to spend some time looking at this to get a sense of what does what and where it appears in the chain. Would have been cool to be able to pick up and drag them around. Would it have justified the effort? Probably not, but seeing I could see it, it was like, ooh, fair enough. So with this, you can kind of pan, they're calling it rotation, like the input and output. How do you get to none? Let's try 0 here. Yes, there we go. Probably nicest here for narrowing down to mono. Because it's very easy to end up with echoes in a mix that sound great in solo. Like here, it sounds super, but in the mix could be a nightmare. Because we could be treading all over all kinds of other things when it's not meant to be a wow, in-your-face effect. And contrary to what some people try to think, or the way they seem to work, is that not everything in your mix should be like the lead of the mix should be. The rest of the mix needs to work around that. Sometimes, if we're going into a snare drum solo where we're going to do a dub thing, then yes, I might well have this sitting here through most of the mix, and then whoomp, as it comes forward to do its funky thing, and then back when it needs to stay inside the mix. Otherwise, you create a kind of soup. But it is nice. It's unusual to see a delay or reverb that allows you to control its width. So kudos for that one, at least. Feedback shaping, otherwise known as EQ. This is in the path. So every time an echo happens, it has been EQ'd, which means the first one we hear is EQ'd. When we hear it again, it's been re-EQ'd, which means it's cumulative when it can get excited. They have solved that problem to a fair extent. So we've got ourselves and straight away we can hear, ooh, that sounds like a dub delay. So we can get relatively pointy with how much we push or pull. That can be a nice thing to do to clarify our reverb or our echo. Now the thing that they've done is given us a compensate function, because you can hear how that is escalating. Because remember, every time this comes through, it picks up that EQ and it adds. If we've added 4 dB here, next time round it's 8 dB, and then it's it's at least 12, if not a lot more, so it very quickly gets out of control, especially with a fair bit of feedback. So they've said, just like a Minimoog filter, as the resonance goes up, we'll turn the whole level output of that filter down. Makes it seem a little less oomph and bassy, but it stops your machine from going into screaming feedback. So it is kind of cool, and they've given you the ability to choose how far you compensate. Like if that's getting too excitable, but you want a little bit of it, you can still have some dialed in. So that's a pretty good thing. The one thing it doesn't do is compensate when you do this. Fair enough, probably, in the sense that this probably has definitely has far less impact slicing a bit of our sound out than it does when we're adding. But seeing you've compensated one side, why not allow it to compensate the other side? But maybe that's just me being annoying. We've also got the ability to high pass and low pass. So if we were to do a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, they are pretty polite filters. Right, wrong, no particular sort of argument on that. They just are. We've then got this diffusion. Diffusion's interesting, and remember, I can't help but compare this to, well, there's some diffusion in the Echo, which is not super powerful. It definitely isn't Valhalla. This is closer to Valhalla. Hear how it's softening? So we've got those hard snare sounds. Let's just... See how that becomes a little bit mushified. So with our spread as to how varied our actual delay is in each instance, or each feedback tap, is how many milliseconds we move it. And obviously at 100 milliseconds we're going straight into a kind of reverb. So this is one way of softening. If you want, and guitarists have to use this quite a bit, if you've got, like you're playing your note and the echo is like pin sharp on the beginning of your pluck, then it can kind of mess up what you're wanting it to sound like. So this is a way of having your echo but not making it as intrusive on the ping, on the attack of it. It's one way of doing it. The other way is to actually use a transient shaper and roll back the attack, and that gives you this essentially the same signal, just with a rolled off front, and you can even hold up the sustain, but it doesn't give you the reverby, mushy smushy sort of thing that we get here. Oh, one thing I saw on Facebook, somebody was saying, oh, why can't we have a pre-delay for this whole process? Because if we've set this up to be a reverb, which is doing a reasonable approximation there of, we don't really have a pre-delay. I don't know. Oh, 5 seconds. That's pretty impressive. I hadn't realized it went that far out. It just leaps up. So it's a logarithmic knob or whatever. How important that is, I don't really know, but if it were me and I had that situation, then I would just create a little combinator with split the signal put, let's say this was my one and only delay as they hope, I'd put this in with, let's say 14 milliseconds, no feedback, no anything, although unless I'm choosing to pre-process, then my second one would look like what we've got here, and that way we would get the pre-delay on this sound. There is a bit of ringing in here. I don't remember ringing in Valhalla. And again, the reason I'm raising Valhalla is because this seems to be pitching itself into the same sort of space, and the diffusion is not as dramatic. Whatever they did, whatever they sold to the devil to do it, is stunning. This is correct, but seeing everything else in the device seems to try to be as clean, as transparent, as non-bad as possible. The little bit of whiny that we're getting in here, I'm not sure. But I guess it's a case of finding that. It's inevitable where you're building delays and reverbs. They will whine. Rooms whine. Everything does. Just kind of makes me think, well, if you're pitching yourself as being the highest quality, the most amazing, then would you find some way to deal with that? But I'm in headphones at the moment, which is a lot different from being in a speaker. In a speaker, it would not be as much of a problem. But diffusion is interesting. So you can set the amount of spread in which these extra delays, I'm assuming that they're bringing in extra delays, how far they spread from the preset time, up to 100 milliseconds, which is plenty, and then how much of that. So that's probably the level of those delays. So just like when you turn on a unison on a synth, you've got one oscillator, you turn on a 40,000 voice unison, you should be able to balance the original voice against the 40,000 and detune them so as to how wonky they get compared to the original tuning and the level. So that's essentially what we're doing here. How far we're detuning, and how much we're balancing that out. It is interesting, and I quite like it. We then got dispersion. Dispersion behaves differently with different things. You can hear here a very definite kind of electronic thwack, quack, kind of a squawk, which doesn't really show in the brass example, but it does show in transient material. You can set at what frequency that's happening. Interesting for an effect. It does add elements of a spring reverb, where quite literally you were whacking the sound into a spring and you could actually hear it. So you listen to Johnny Cash, George Jones, early kind of stuff, and you can actually hear the spring as they're playing guitars. Cool sound. I don't think this is a perfect emulation of a spring. What it brings, I'm not sure. I feel like it's a little one-dimensional and possibly could use a couple more knobs to allow us to have some more variety. I think the idea is interesting, and being able to add, let's character is always a potentially welcome thing. I just don't fully understand how it's going to be of great value in every situation. Again, I feel like maybe a couple of extra knobs would have not gone astray. Obviously, it works nicer with diffusion. Would take some time to see how much that added value, but it hasn't bowled me over. It's a bit of a kooky feature. Then we've got this tape saturation. So it's kind of an EQ, warms things a little bit, and then we can add this drive, which gets pretty trashy pretty fast. But the theory is that you would be using these together. But if you have a look, gain here and tape saturation, I don't know whether that's supposed to be, like, because there doesn't seem to be any other gain here. But if that's I'm not quite sure where that comes in the situation, but I'm a little unsold on it. There's a big difference as you move in and out. And then digital grit. This one's better than I expected. Normally, I'm not a fan of sample munging. This one is interesting. We can go down to 4 bits, which is a bit... You'll have to really push your input to get that one to behave. But sort of 8-bit and up. Something that actually is good here is that they've predefined certain practical numbers and not just allowed us to go 17.4389 because in reality, certain devices, there are logical balances of this versus that in terms of bit depths and sample rates and what have you. And weird rates, while happened, I think are reasonably well covered here. So we hear our signal degrade. I think the theory is that between these we should be able to emulate old speaker cabinets with, combos. So Sidemen or whatever that had springs in them. I just don't feel it, unfortunately. I don't feel like I'm creating this cool, amazing object. I feel like I'm doing this kind of digital processing to what's coming out the other end. So as I said from the beginning, I felt like, yeah, its strength is its weakness. Its strength is that whatever comes out the back end seems incredibly high quality, incredibly clean. We put it through these processes, we ask it to have done these things to it, but I don't feel like we've sort of moved ourselves sideways into somewhere that we weren't or couldn't be before. Now, for some people, that's going to be like, oh yeah, but that's exactly what I want. For other people like me, it's going to be like, I don't feel like we've got a unique instrument here. I feel like we've got a collection of digital processes that do what they're here to do absolutely perfectly, but never make this amazing other thing. So I'm playing here with sort of simple drum type stuff, and if you want to hear the difference between, say, this, where everything is perfect, and let's say, the real deal, then I'll pop up a cover for a compilation from a goth rock band from early mid-'80s called Play Dead. And as you go through that, especially with some of the remixy stuff, you hear a lot of this full-on use of delays on snares, in particular on drum kits, and listen to the difference from what we get out of Dual Delay, which is very pristine, and what's coming off that record. Sure, there's a little bit more happening because we've got a whole record and what have you, but it's that feel in the Play Dead record that I'm looking for, and I don't feel like this delivers that third something. Yes, we can set it up technically and go, oh, well, that's the same process, but I don't think we've got the moving sideways that we hope for in analog gear. So that's sort of a shame. Possible solutions, if you really like this but you want to see if it's going to move sideways, would be, I guess you could maybe do most of your work here and then pop it through a second device. Perhaps, just because we've got it open, you could do it through the Hertz delay. Maybe that, putting the two together, so set up most of what you want in the UVI device, and then the Hertz delay to do a little bit of sideways move, so it's no longer as pure and perfect and clean. Another thing, I just reviewed it, was the analog tape AX70 something. We'll pop that up there as well, because I felt like that added a kind of like, well, that's non-linear, that's not what I expected to come out of this. That sort of sideways movement, which is what makes a piece of gear either really super annoying, throw it out of the studio, I never want to see it again, I'll laugh when the bus runs over it, or and it becomes part of your sound, your thing. That would be a way, perhaps, of bridging. I have to leave that to you to try this to see how you go. So my final words are, again, I think that it's a pretty fascinating device that probably delivers exactly what they set out to achieve. So here, where I want to translate all the detail of that sound, I think it does a great job. So where the Hertz delay, let's pop a pair of these fellas up together. Again, Hertz delay is munging. Everything's moved sideways. We've got a different result. Whereas here we've got the same result with the addition of those processes that we've put it through. There is no right or wrong here. I will just admit that I tend to be more on this side of things, which is why I'm not really a fan of things like most of FabFilter's stuff, like the Pro Q and things like that. And yet, where I reviewed the Kirchhoff, which in many ways is sort of transparent, but somehow it adds to the process in a way that I like. But that's going to be a very personal choice. So my final words are, you really need to spend some time with this device and see if it adds to what you're doing. If you have a DAW that has a stock delay that either is really poor or you just don't dig it. I don't dig the interface for the Reaper delay, re-delay or whatever it's called. There's nothing wrong with it. It works. It does what it says it's going to do. I think it lacks filters. But it's a clean, tidy, straight reverb. But I don't enjoy using it, in which case Dual Delay X would make a good replacement as a here's my benchmark reverb. Here's my benchmark delay that I use for duplicating whatever is going on. Then yes, it would be a worthy contender in that sort of a situation. But if you're looking for something that's going to make the world move sideways when you use it, like plugging a guitar into a Marshall stack, the world moves sideways, then Dual Delay X may not be the thing that you're looking for. That's where you go out and you find a character unit. Its quality is impeccable. Its processes are impeccable, but they're very polite. You're going to have to decide where you go on that one. I hope you have found this useful. I've thought it's been a very interesting device to look at. If it were my stock delay on my door, I would be pretty happy with it, but I'd also be pretty frustrated with it when I was looking for its ability to bring some kind of sideways magic, in which case I'd be going out and going, where can I find a delay line that, I put a sound into it and I feel like I've been transported somewhere else. I'll keep saying that, but I really want you to take the time to play with the demo, which is very open, easy to get, and it's got an iLok thing, but it was probably the easiest iLok process for sign up and what have you that I've ever had. So kudos to UVI on that one as well. If you have any questions, hit subscribe, please, if you haven't already, and ask us down below. If you just want to say some nice things, ask down below. Your engagement on YouTube really helps to tell YouTube themselves, their algorithm, that we are valued and important, and that helps us to rise, to become bigger, far more than just plays. So engage as much as you can, please. I like being able to answer questions, but just not troubleshooting with UVI, because that's a UVI thing between them and their servers. I think we're done. Go out, grab this unit, have a play with it. There is the thing that it set out to achieve. It does really, really well, and if that's what you're looking for, I think it's the most transparent delay that I have ever played with, and I've played with many, many delays. So in that sense, it's achieved that mark superbly. You have a great day.